Hey everybody, it's Jonathan. It's Monday. Welcome to another Facebook Live here. If you're listening on iTunes or if you're watching on YouTube, thanks so much. Listen, while you're here, be sure to leave a comment wherever you are. Leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know where you're from. That way, I'd love to know who's getting this and where they are in the world, as we're all stuck at home. So I just wanted to reach out today and talk about uh, something that's kind of unique. Obviously, if you're watching the news or you've been kind of seeing what's going on, like the IOC recently, we've got the Tokyo Olympics coming up in July, and that looks like at this point it's 4 months away, but it looks like at this point it's going to be postponed. There's a lot of political pressure here going on. From what I'm hearing right now from all my um, kind of people in the powers that be, that the Olympics has already been postponed and potentially canceled, which is really frustrating, as you can possibly imagine. So, one of the things that uh, of the Olympic hopefuls that I work with, there's just some things I wanted to share today. Because whether you have an Olympic hopeful in your house, or if you have an athlete who's stuck at home, or you know, for the work that I do with overcomeanychallenge.com, I talk about how, basically the techniques and tactics to overcome any challenge you can learn from games and sport. And so my athletes are some of the best examples of people who are overcoming any challenge. And so in the work in the new book that I'm writing, I talk about this, and I really go through the science behind why this is really true. And one of the things that I just wanted to share today to everyone was basically the number one tactic that I use with my athletes or with anybody to help get them through a challenge like this. So, as you can imagine, for my athletes who have been training for years, for the Olympic Games that's coming up in July. Now that is now not there, and so we're still in a stage of where it's a little bit iffy. The IOC has kind of put things off for a month, but Canada pulled out, Australia pulled out. It's only a matter of time before there's all this political pressure, and then the IOC has to cave. But behind the scenes is what a lot of people don't understand. And so for athletes, they just want to compete, and the Olympics is this venue that's there that they feel that they have a right to, and then to have this torn away for virus reasons and political reasons and corporate reasons and all this stuff, is really difficult to comprehend. And like most losses, whether it's the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, the loss of a chance to compete at the Olympics, a loss of your business dreams or hopes or aspirations or things like that, what can happen, or what happens is that the athlete is going to grieve just like they lost a loved one, right? And I'm the first person kind of in this field that I know of who talks about this openly, because what tends to happen, and this is really incorrect, is that people look at the athletes right now who aren't competing in the Olympics and say, "Oh, this is bigger than sport." But as an athlete, you don't operate like that, right? For the person who's operating the startup and just was getting traction, and now the virus comes by, and now they're losing this company, telling that person that this is bigger than your business, or for my athletes, this is bigger than sport, that is really insulting. It's like telling someone who just lost their grandmother, her grandmother just died, that, oh, this is bigger than grandma's. Right? This is bigger than, there's other grandmas out there, right? And so that's how absurd that argument is, because it it is completely based on the individual's aspirations, what they're trying to accomplish. Again, whether it's the athlete going to the Olympics, whether it's someone who gets diagnosed with cancer or their grandmother dies, anything like that, the the need to grieve is very individual. And so, as you can imagine, for my athletes, they're kind of across the spectrum. And I want to share today uh, what's called the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. And so Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a very famous psychologist, one of the psychologists. She created this five kind of this level of stages of grief. And so I want you to know that, whether your athlete may be home because their season just got ripped out from under them. You might have someone in the house who's losing a job because they've been told to stay at home, and now their boss is like, "I can't pay you. We don't have enough money to pay you," so they're cutting people loose. the grieving stages are really important to understand. And so the first grieving stage that you totally have to understand is that it's denial. And so what's really interesting for my athletes is because this has gotten so, once we were getting in all these home restrictions and these social distancing issues, and some of my athletes didn't have a place to go train, but a lot of my athletes did. A lot of people think that, oh, athletes had no place to train, when in fact, many of my athletes were, they were finding places to train just as effectively as they were prior to this whole coronavirus thing coming down. Now, the iffy thing for them was that there weren't competitions, and there were some of my athletes still looking forward to having the opportunity to compete to make the team, which so that was very up in the air. So a lot of my athletes have already were already in these first couple stages of the grief cycle. So the first one is denial, and in denial we have shock and fear, and we have confusion, we have avoidance. It's just this weird state where it's like this can't be happening, right? This can't be happening. And depending on how invested the athlete is, that denial stage gets even more severe. And so what's kind of cool about this grief cycle is that it goes up and down. Like it basically has these peaks and these troughs to it. So what's the most important thing I can give you right now to understand is to let your athlete, or let the person going through this stage, go through this. Like basically you can't it's like pulling a flower out of the ground, and telling it to grow. It doesn't work. You have to let the athlete go through these cycles, and in their own time. All right, in their own time. And so the first one is denial. The second one is anger. So a lot of people think that anger comes before denial, and they can kind of be mixed. My experience with really competitive people, whether it's athletes or business owners, it's that they're just like, they're full of emotion, full of energy, and that's totally fine. It's okay to have emotion. We just don't want to get stuck there for too long. So it's really important that we allow this person, this athlete, to go through the uh, to go through the stages and to feel the stages. I had a little bit of a back and forth on Facebook today with a gentleman who said, cancel the useless Olympics. And this was actually someone who had been to the Olympics. And so, but this person's like in his, probably in his 60s, or like, more time. And I felt that comment was so insulting to the person that has gone through this. It's like, if you lost a loved one and someone came up to you and said, suck it up, right? There's more grandmas around. There's more grandpa, you'll have another dad. Like, no, it just makes no sense. And it's super insulting the person going through it. So what I want, the denial and anger stages, that are the first two stages, people can kind of show both of them almost at the same time. But anger obviously is frustration and irritation, and then anxiety. And we really want the athlete to process the emotion, and because if they don't process it completely, then they get stuck. That energy gets stuck, and we don't want that, right? So we got to let the athlete go through the phase of anger. So right now, a lot of my athletes are going through all of this, but because this has been kind of up in the air, they've already been experiencing some of these emotions prior to today. And what's frustrating a lot of them is that it's still a little up in the air. Is that, well, we don't know. Are the games going to be postponed for the thing that makes the most sense right now is to postpone the games for a year. Primarily because in the world of sport, the sports schedules are packed outside of this month of July. That's why the Olympics kind of happen when it does. And so there's just thousands of contracts and things involved with this. It's really complicated. So what we're hoping is that it's postponed for a year. However, I have some insight that it may be canceled, and that this might involve the Japanese government, and there's just these massive forces behind the Olympics. That's really different than any other sport. So for those of you that might be, sports fans in football or baseball or hockey or things like this doesn't compare. It seems like it's small on some scales, but really it's so big on so many levels. So So that's really out of our athletes' control, right? They just don't really know what they don't know, and that is creating a little bit more frustration than you would hope. But again, the athletes, they have to go through this in their own time. So the third stage of the grief cycle is bargaining. Right. So bargaining is this idea of like struggling to find meaning. And so I think globally, everybody's trying to find meaning in all of this, right? Like, why do we have this virus that's causing us all to be indoors? Like, is this Mother Nature's way of controlling global warming? Like, whatever. It's kind of fascinating because whatever meaning you're finding for it, that's yours. That's totally yours. And you've probably found this already, but you've probably butted up into other people who have different, understandings or different values. And so your meaning is going to differ from theirs. But again, for my athletes, they all have their own meaning. And as an athlete, as someone who's young, typically, uh, they've got obviously a lot of time and energy invested, a lot of mental capital into this dream. And if you don't know what that means, it's really hard to relate to. Okay. So what's really fascinating to me about this is, again, whether it's the Olympics or it's whether you have a startup or it's whether you've just lost a loved one or whatever, it's that your emotional capital is different than my emotional capital in this topic, right? So that's where it's really important to be sensitive to everybody going through it on their own way. Okay, that's really important. So that's bargaining is the third one. So in the bargaining stage, though, your athlete may they may start reaching out to others. They might find that it's really important to share their story and their pain of what they're going through. All right. And allowing them a voice and allowing them an audience to share that. Right. So much of the time that I've been spending recently has been on the phone with my athletes, just letting them vent and letting them express their concerns. And I did a video this past week on the 5 love languages, the Gary Chapman book. And one of the love languages, or one of the principles, I think this actually stems off of the love language book, but it goes back to Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, that book, whereas like women will tend will share their ideas to get them out of their head, to process it and to kind of see, but for men, they tend to keep it inside. So how men versus women will deal with this is also really important. But what's really interesting is that if you're a male coach, like I am, and you're dealing with a female athlete, you really want to allow them the time to vent and express, what they're feeling about it and how they're thinking about it, right? And that's really, really, really important, because they have to tell their story in order for them to process it in a way and that's just their way of doing that, right? So we have to be respectful of that. So the fourth stage the fourth stage for my athletes is depression, right? And so, it's a little bit of they're just overwhelmed by it all right now. They've put in so much time and energy and dedication and sacrifice, and now to have that lost or even delayed, it's just a little overwhelming, right? And it just feels heavy. And a lot of my athletes going through phases like this, they'll just sleep, right? They'll just want to just shut down, and that's completely okay. Some of my athletes show signs of, you know, I'll get an email from a mom or dad and be like, "Oh my God, he's crazy! Like he's just lashing out and he's upset." And yeah, that totally makes sense too. And sometimes I did have this happen, not this year, but I had this happen 2 years ago with an athlete who took off, like got in their car and just drove, and nobody knew where they were for a while. And the athlete, my reassurance was that the athlete was safe. The athlete wasn't going to do anything kind of nefarious or untoward to themselves or others, but it was just this idea that they needed to get away. They needed to run away for a bit to be able to deal and process. And so that's really common when it goes through anybody going through grief, when they hit that depression stage, that sometimes they just don't want to talk to anybody. And as a loving human, you may want to express your love in a certain way that is not what they need at this moment. And that can be really hard for you as both a parent or coach, but it's the time where you need to just kind of allow them again to process. So as we move out of the depression stage and into the fifth stage that my athletes are going through, it's acceptance. And so again, depending on your mental capital invested in the project, you may get to the acceptance stage quicker than the person who's going through it. So right now for my athletes, they're all in different stages. Some of my athletes prepared themselves for this possibility to happen, so they've already kind of accepted it, and they're going to take a few days off or a week off, and they're going to go. I love the story. For those of you that are NFL fans, when the Patriots beat Seattle in the Super Bowl a few years ago, uh, Seattle they're like a yard away or 2 yards away from the end zone. And instead of running the ball into the end zone, they tried to pass. And Russell Wilson, who's the quarterback, made a pass and it got picked off, and the Patriots won. And the Seattle had like 3 plays to get in the end zone. So this was like the first of 3 potential plays to get in the end zone. And they went to pass, and sure enough, they got picked off. And so, right after the Super Bowl, these athletes have to go to the press conference and talk. And what ends up happening is that they're just immediately confronted with their they haven't had a time to process this emotion yet. And a couple of years before, Cam Newton, who was the quarterback of the Carolina Panthers, who'd lost at a horrible Super Bowl and lost, and he gets up to the podium for the press conference. And I'm just always in awe of my athletes that have to do anything like that, where they have to somehow process their feelings in a way that the world can understand immediately after their event. And that's just so unfair, right? So Cam Newton got up there and had a horrible press conference and came off just like a child. And then what ended up happening, though, when Russell Wilson had this situation happen a couple of years later, he came off as poised, and he came off as just able to process it all, even though inside he was hurting. Now, as the story goes, we saw 2 totally different athletes there, and one who was Russell Wilson had actually lost his father years before, right? Had gone through a tremendous amount of grief. And people attributed Russell Wilson's approach and his ability to deal with a pretty devastating situation, just losing the Super Bowl. But the idea was that he was able to process that grief because he had already gone through a level of grief before. And so what's really interesting for my athletes, none of them have had something like this happen, where they've been so invested into their career that some of them are, it's a big denial phase and it's a big anger phase. And that's just something that you have to understand, because over time, as adults, as people have seen, people have gone through other viruses, and we've gone through SARS and H1N1 and all this stuff. We have a level of like, oh, we'll get through this. Yes, this one was worse than the others, but we're going to get through this. But to your athlete, this is so raw, right? And to someone who's never started a business before and had it fail, if they've started a business and now they're going through this, this is so raw for them, right? So we've got to be careful in how we let them process it, right? So that final stage of the grief cycle, which is acceptance, everybody goes through it differently, and depending on, again, your mental capital invested in this particular project, you may already be moving through acceptance, right? So Russell Wilson at the Super Bowl, he had already had a taste of acceptance because he realized this was one event on a much larger scale. He had dealt with grief before in his life that made this seem small, right? So when people tell an Olympian, hey, this is bigger than sport, they have no context for that. That makes no sense to them. And it's insulting and it's offensive and it doesn't help them through anything. It's best to help the individual through the stages by themselves, right? And while you may want to have them rush through because you don't want to deal with their, as a parent, we can all relate to this. When you get a kid in your house and they're sulking and they're upset, you just want them out of it, right? Because it just brings everybody's mood down. But they have to work through it on their own. And so just like anybody dealing with any sort of grief, our athletes are going through the same thing. So I wanted to share that today because there's been a lot of talk and a lot of conversation now, It's like a lot of people have already moved on. Globally, some people don't care about the Olympics. They're like, yeah, whatever. It's a waste of time and money and energy and blah blah blah. And it's affecting the world. They're way past the acceptance stage. But to the person in that, then we've got to let them go through their thing. What I always find really interesting is that people are very quick to rush other people through to acceptance, but then when they go through their own grief, they need all the time in the world to get through it on their own. So we just need a little compassion for everybody, whether it's a collegiate athlete at home right now because their season just got cut short, or for the high school athletes that were ready to go, and the parents who are also ready to go because that's a big deal too. A lot of we forget that it's not just about the athletes involved, it's about the coaches and the support staff. I can guarantee you this, like one of the best parts of every Olympic Games are the volunteers. Like there's thousands of people who volunteer their time to get a coat and some snow pants and get some pins and go be part of the games as a volunteer. And in Japan in the past, like I was in Nagano years ago. The Japanese people are so sweet, and they've been looking forward to this too. They are grieving, right? So this isn't just about a handful of athletes that are dealing with this. It's thousands and thousands of people, and also the countries that ride on this too. Like that, for those of you listening to me in North America, sometimes it's really hard to relate to the passion around a weightlifter from Nigeria that made the Olympic Games, or the women who qualified from Syria, right, or countries like that. Like there's just such unbridled emotion and passion around that whole countries right now, they're dealing with the virus, yes, but then now this as well. This is something that I was really personally, I was looking forward to in July. I was hopeful that we were going to be able to pull this off, because I feel like by July, we're all going to be looking forward to something like this, right? We're all going to be looking forward to an event to lift our spirits. And so I was hopeful that we could have gotten through it, but it is what it is. And so our athletes are grieving as well as everybody else. So just to recap real quick, okay, the grief cycle: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Your athlete or somebody else who's going through a grieving period right now, they've got to go through these cycles all by themselves. But one of the things that really helps, and this helps all my athletes, is understanding how this cycle works, right? Understanding that these emotions that they're feeling, right, are normal and natural, and we've seen them across, millions of people, and we just know that this is how this is going to go. This is how this is going to go. So, if you weren't planning for that, this is going to feel really hard. But if you can share this with them and then let them know, like, hey, this is the cycle you're going to go through, then and you're going to come out the other side and you're going to be okay, right? Just being aware of it can be helpful. So I hope this helps you too. So thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for listening. Do me a favor, share this with an athlete or a coach or a parent who needs to hear it. Come check out over at overcomeanychallenge.com. I've got a free PDF on the perfect day formula, which is kind of cool, that I think everybody at this, especially during this time, could use. So I hope you check that out. And by all means, I look forward to your comments. So leave me a comment below, or you can reach out to me at jonathan@overcomeanychallenge.com, or find me here on Facebook at Olympic Jonathan. All right, guys, have a great day. Bye.